today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. You may have heard earlier today that Amanda Serrano versus Danila Ramos is set to go down on October 27th, 3-minute rounds in what is a 12-round fight. Amanda seeks to change the standard of women's boxing from 10 2-minute rounds to 12 3-minute rounds, just like the boys.
7-division champion and undisputed featherweight champion, current reigning, Amanda the Real Deal Serrano will face mandatory challenger Danila La Guerrera Ramos
on Friday, October 27th at the Caribe Royale Resort in Orlando, Florida. Serrano versus Ramos will be preceded by MVP's third installment of its most valuable prospect series. The world title fight between Serrano and Ramos will be contested over 12 3-minute rounds equal to men's championship fights.
Now, the fight is being billed as a unified title fight, not an undisputed title fight. I noticed the verbiage on the poster.
It could be that the World Boxing Council is standing on their square and they don't wish to sanction a women's fight that's for 12 3-minute rounds. In previous years, we have seen their resistance.
Based on their research, 12 3-minute rounds for a woman increases the probability of a concussion, something along those lines, and for that reason, they don't wish to sanction women's bouts for 12 3-minute rounds.
What they've said in the past. To date, per the Association of Boxing Commissions and Combative Sports, women's championship fights have been contested as 10-round bouts at 2 minutes per round. Most Valuable Prospects 3, which precedes Serrano versus Ramos, will be headlined by Antonio Vargas, as he looks to defend his WBA Continental America's bantamweight title in a 10-round bout. Serrano versus Ramos seeks to set a new standard for women's boxing, one that hasn't been seen since Layla McCarter versus Melissa Hernandez in 2007. This marks over 15 years since the sport has garnered a women's fight equal to a men's maximum of 12 rounds at 3 minutes each.
The subject of 3-minute rounds in a women's boxing match often gets mixed reviews. Some women fighters are for it. Some
feel that if they're going to fight for more time, it should come with more money. Others are quite comfortable with 10 2-minute rounds.
It all depends on who you ask.
Danila Ramos may be my WBO mandatory challenger, but when we step in the ring, she will understand exactly why I am the undisputed featherweight champion, said Serrano. But this fight is about more than some belts. We have faced a long and hard battle, united as women, to achieve the same pay, respect, and recognition in boxing. Together, on Friday, October 27th, we will make history and prove to the world once again how incredible women's boxing is, and that we are just as tough, dynamic, and capable as any man in the ring, if not more so. This is a fight for women everywhere to be treated the same as their male counterparts.
Pros and cons.
10 2-minute rounds makes for a faster pace and a faster fight, which leads to more entertainment value. I've actually always appreciated 10 2-minute rounds. 12 3-minute rounds.
What's the virtue?
More time in a round and more time to knock the other girl out.
I've often heard it said over the years that if there were a bit more time in the round, or if there were more rounds in the fight, you'd see more knockouts in the sport of women's boxing.
Danila Ramos, the veteran fighter of Buenos Aires by way of Sao Paulo, Brazil, was ordered by the WBO on August 28th as the mandatory challenger for Serrano's featherweight world title. On August 18th, Ramos won the WBO Interim World Featherweight Championship via a split decision over Brenda Karen Carvajal in Buenos Aires, who had held the belt since May 13th of last year. Fighting Amanda Serrano for 12 3-minute rounds for a unified championship is set to break the barriers that we women have been looking to do for many years, said Ramos. We will go down in history and the books. It will be a fight of two women warriors. I am prepared like never before for this fight and will proudly represent Brazil as we battle in Orlando, Florida, and I look to bring all the belts home.
My thoughts.
Danila Ramos is some years older than Amanda Serrano, but nowhere near as seasoned. She doesn't have the same ceiling that Amanda has, so I already had Amanda beating her. Tack on 12 3-minute rounds instead of 10 2-minute rounds, and in all likelihood, Amanda's gonna knock her out. You often hear about Amanda's volume punching or her punching power, but another one of Amanda's finer qualities is she's got a great engine.
Great cardio. She can throw punches and bunches from the opening round to the final round.
I've seen it in more than one situation that if a fighter, a female fighter, would have had a little bit more time in a round, the fight likely wouldn't have went the distance and it would have resulted in a knockout. I feel that that applies here for Amanda Serrano and Danila Ramos. Danila is good, God bless her. She's a solid fighter.
But she don't punch like Amanda.
It's already a high probability that Amanda was going to beat her. If you add more time to the round and more rounds to the fight, in all likelihood, it doesn't go the distance. Amanda stops her.
I remember the first Heather Hardy fight that Amanda had. Amanda hurt her right away, and if there would have been a little bit more time in those early rounds, Heather might not have made it.
Think about Danila Ramos and how, so far, Danila's never been stopped. But there's a first time for everything, and if she's going to be opposite the ring Amanda Serrano, of all people, in a 12-round fight, 3 minutes a round, there's a good chance Amanda takes her out.
She gets stopped.
The question now is, will the boxing commissions, the alphabet organizations, and the powers that be, all of them, will they jointly decide to make it official? Make women's bouts 12 rounds, 3 minutes a round.
This is a step in the right direction.
That direction. And my feelings haven't changed. I already had Amanda winning this fight. Now I definitely have her winning it, and winning it by way of knockout. Men's welterweight news. Former WBA champion Yordenis Ugas said, "I don't know what the fuck happened. That wasn't the Spence that fought me."
How convenient.
After the Ugas fight, much like after the Danny Garcia fight, all you could hear about is how Errol Spence Jr. was back, that there are no residual effects from that horrific car accident he suffered, only so that as soon as he loses, the excuses can start.
That's what these people love to do. They love to make excuses.
Ugas couldn't believe what unfolded right in front of him the night of July 29th at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. The former WBA welterweight champion anticipated a very competitive fight between Errol Spence Jr. and Terrence Crawford. Watching Crawford dominate a then unbeaten Spence was perplexing to Ugas, who lost his WBA belt to Spence in Spence's previous fight 15 months earlier. "I don't know what the fuck happened," Ugas told BoxingScene.com through a translator. "I mean, that wasn't the Spence that fought with me. He seemed like a completely different person."
Opposite the ring, a better fighter, a way better fighter than you are. He is a completely different person. He isn't the wrecking machine that you faced.
He's ordinary. He's basic, because that's what elite fighters do. They make good fighters
Look like basic fighters.
Of course, Ugas is perplexed. Errol Spence Jr. gave him all he could handle when they fought, but Ugas is no Terrence Crawford.
That's what he doesn't understand.
Yordenis Ugas himself, his claim to fame is what? A close fight with Sean Porter that he lost? Or fighting an aged, over-the-hill Manny Pacquiao that had not fought in roughly 2 years?
Sorry to tell you, he's no Terrence Crawford.
None of them are. Not Yordenis Ugas, not Danny Garcia, not Mikey Garcia. None of the fighters that Errol Spence Jr. shared the ring with were of the same ilk as Terrence Crawford. Ugas, like Spence, found that out the hard way.
Well, Ugas was ringside.
All he had to do was watch in horror, as the man who dismantled him was being dismantled from that kid from the other side of the street.
Can't say I didn't tell you so. I did.
You thought that a guy who balloons in weight between fights, drinks alcohol,
As often as Errol does.
Errol doesn't behave like a full-time fighter in spite of the reputation, in spite of the pedestal they try to put him on.
He's been that way for years.
33-year-old Spence has since exercised his contractual right to an immediate rematch. Neither the date nor the weight limit for their second fight have been set yet, but Spence expressed his desire, after suffering his first defeat, to challenge Crawford 7 pounds higher at the junior middleweight maximum of 154 in their second showdown. Ugas suspects squeezing himself down to 147 adversely affected Spence's performance in their Showtime pay-per-view.
I think that at 154, the rematch will be a more competitive fight, said Ugas.
And I think that the PBC's stable of fighters collectively, and everyone associated with the brand collectively, is feeling it, feeling the pinch, that Errol Spence Jr. was supposed to be one of their best fighters, one of their best fighters, and look at how easily Terrence dominated him.
So of course Ugas is going to say, well, that's not the same guy that I fought, and something was wrong with him.
Of course he's going to say that, because Errol getting dominated by Terrence makes the entire PBC stable look bad.
Beyond an Errol Spence Jr. rematch, Terrence has bigger fish to fry.
He wants the winner of Canelo versus Charlo.
Which I anticipate is going to be Canelo.
Before Bo Mack got himself arrested in the United Kingdom, he said he was excited about Crawford versus Canelo as a possibility, saying, "I want to try to outthink Eddie Reynoso."
Bo should have thought about that before he tried to board a plane with a loaded weapon.
Crawford isn't the only one who feels confident in his abilities to get the job done. When recently asked, Brian "Bo-Mac" McIntyre, Crawford's longtime trainer, didn't seem worried in the slightest. From his point of view, all that needs to be done is a bit of studying. Mentally, we're ready, said Bo-Mac during an interview with Fight Hub TV. All we've got to do is our homework.
That's what he said before he got arrested.
Fighting Errol Spence Jr. for a second time, presumably at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, seems little more than a formality. I mean, even without Brian McIntyre in his corner, I'm confident that Terence Crawford can do the same or better against Errol Spence, even at 154.
Errol still loses.
Haymanites are trying hard to cope with what they saw and coming up with every excuse in the book, holding out hope that at 154 it will be a different fight.
It's what they did after Wilder got his ass kicked by Fury.
Beyond that fight, the winner of Canelo versus Charlo awaits. For Bo-Mac, who's been around the sport for decades, he's never gotten the chance to face a fighter with Reynoso standing in their corner. The thought of doing that ultimately excites him. Let's go. That's a challenge to me too as a trainer. I want to try and outthink Eddie Reynoso over there. I've never faced him.
Could be facing 3 to 5 years in prison over there in the UK.
I'm still holding out hope that somebody here stateside can pull some strings to bring Bo-Mac back to America, but it's not looking good.
I think Crawford washes Errol Spence Jr. again at 154. I think he beats him again.
But beyond an Errol Spence Jr. rematch, if he's serious about moving up in weight and facing the winner of Canelo versus Charlo, and if the winner turns out to be Canelo Alvarez, Terence is going to need all hands on deck.
I think.
I'd say so. Eddie Hearn says, as good as Terence Crawford is, Canelo Alvarez is too big.
So some people are saying that Canelo Alvarez would walk right through Terence Crawford's shots, walk through his punches, and stops him.
Hearn, who worked with Canelo for several of his fights on DAZN, feels the Mexican star is too big and too good for Crawford to overcome at such a high weight limit. I hope Canelo beats Charlo. If you're going to ask me about the Terence Crawford fight, you're talking about two of my favorite fighters, two modern-day greats. I do think Canelo Alvarez is too big for Terence Crawford. As good as Terence Crawford is, in my opinion, you will never see Canelo come under 168 pounds in a fight. I don't think he wants to do that. 168 is still a bit, not tough, but it's enough, Hearn told the DAZN Boxing Show.
Implying that Canelo Alvarez isn't going to come down for Terence, but he doesn't have to. Terence is talking about moving up to a full 168 pounds to face him.
Eddie Hearn continued, I don't think you see Crawford come up to 168, and I think if he does, I don't think he beats Canelo. So I'm not sure whether that fight happens, but if it does, two great fighters, and I'll favor Alvarez.
Well, I can't blame him.
A jump from 147 up to 168 or 154 to 168, it is a big jump. It is a broad leap, and it's a leap of faith.
Terence has what it takes to beat Canelo Alvarez.
You either believe it or you don't. And there's no wrong answer until they're in the ring, until they actually fight.
Terence has the right base style for the job, but perhaps not the size, perhaps not the power or the durability.
Perhaps he doesn't. Perhaps he does. Perhaps now is the time to move up in weight and challenge Canelo Alvarez when you have a speed advantage because he's slowing down.
It's another way to look at it.
I don't know if we're going to get this fight. I don't know for sure, but it's definitely interesting. It is a conversation.
So is Crawford versus Charlo.
It's a conversation, too. Former two-division champion and recent Hall of Fame inductee Timothy Bradley believes Terence Crawford would stop Jermell sooner than he stopped Errol Spence.
It's a bold proclamation.
He knows how to beat Charlo already, claimed Bradley during an interview with FightHype.com. His team knows how to beat Charlo already. Charlo, no matter the outcome against Alvarez, has already stated that he isn't quite done with the junior middleweight division. Tim Tszyu, however, isn't likely to simply step aside and allow Crawford to skip to the front of the queue. Since becoming a world champion well over 5 years ago, the Houston native has welcomed all challengers. Ultimately, the hard-hitting pound-for-pound star would love to test the chin of Crawford in the not-so-distant future in terms of how their showdown would play out.
Listen,
I don't even think Terence Crawford versus Jermell Charlo is likely to happen, though if we're going to have that conversation, you have to think about that fight in two possible ways. One way is Terence Crawford moving up to 168.
the other is Jermell Charlo moving back down. to 154, which seems even less likely to me.
If Jermell Charlo beats Canelo Alvarez, there may be a second fight right there at 168 pounds, which would mean Terence has got to move up. He's got to move all the way up and take on Jermell up there, because it's not likely that Jermell would come back down. Not if he becomes undisputed champion at super middleweight.
It's if he wins.
If he loses, and let's just say, on the off chance that he moves back down to junior middleweight, then maybe Tim Bradley's forecast, then maybe it's accurate, because, you know, at least in men's boxing, when you go up, you're not supposed to come back down.
Women's boxing, the women fluctuate in weight a bit easier than the men do.
Maybe it's because when moving up and down in weight and shedding those pounds, they're shedding fat and water weight. They're not actually cutting muscle. Whereas the guys, they're not at liberty to move up and down in weight as easily as the girls do, because oftentimes they're shedding muscle, which has an adverse effect on performance.
It's going to be a destruction, the same if not sooner. He'll probably stop Charlo a lot sooner, said Timothy Bradley.
The only way I could see a prediction like that coming into fruition is if Jermell loses at 168, decides he's going to drop all the way back down to 154, then maybe Terence gets him easier than he got Errol Spence Jr. on the premise that in that situation, Jermell would be depleted.
When you go up, you're not supposed to come back down.
You go up to 168, maybe you get knocked out. You decide you're going to boil all the way back down to 154 to fight Terence Crawford. He might actually get you in that situation because you'll be depleted from cutting all that weight. Remember, Jermell Charlo hasn't made junior middleweight in over a year's time. The Brian Castano fight was the last time that he made it, and that was over a year ago.
The scenario we're describing entails Jermell Charlo not actually making junior middleweight in roughly 2 years. So if he were foolhardy enough to go back there for Terence Crawford, yeah, he might actually get knocked out. The thing is, I don't think he's going to do that.
I don't think he's going to come back to 154. I think all of this talk from Jermell about potentially returning to junior middleweight,
it's hot air.
It's bullshit. You're not going to make all this money, all these millions opposite the ring Canelo at 168 to then go and kill yourself to make 154 for less money.
It's bullshit.
It's much ado about nothing if it's anything, because beyond the Canelo Alvarez fight, whether Jermell wins or loses, I don't think he's coming back to 154.
I feel like the only way Terence Crawford ends up fighting this guy is if this guy beats Canelo and then Terence meets him at 168.